Hello, and welcome back to Beyond the Veil Stories. Today's haunted tale is from Wild T9242. Thank you for permitting me to share your story. A link to their profile and the story will be in the description. If you enjoy the story, please leave it a like and share your opinion in the comments. If you want to be notified when I post, be sure to subscribe. Now, I lost my sister to the Fae Part 1. I've only recently recovered this memory upon returning to my woodsy hometown in Maine after studying abroad for college. Whether you want to believe it was a figment of an overactive child's imagination or a supernatural phenomenon is up to you. I just hope you'll read this with an open mind. Believing in things like that in this day and age is a social suicide. I don't want to lose people's respect over a belief like this. So I'm choosing to remain anonymous. Call me Nina. I am the eldest of two siblings, a biological one named Zoe, and one which was adopted into our family at a later date after the events of this story. All of this happened because of Zoe, basically. Right now, I'm 19, and I'm spending winter break at Grandma's house, which has been in the family for generations and is located on a rural plot of land. She has some nearby neighbors, and it's still pretty close to town, so I wouldn't say it's secluded or anything. Our parents died in a really bad car accident while we were at school one day, and it hit our family pretty hard. My mom's parents were jerks. She was estranged from them for a long time when she was alive, and made it clear she wanted nothing to do with them. They refused to take me and my sister, but my dad's parents, who we had bonded with since birth and were pretty active in our lives, took us in and gave us love and lots of therapy. I was 9 and Zoe was 3 when this happened, and despite being elderly, they had no problems keeping up with us. I'm eternally grateful to them for not giving us to the system. Unfortunately, our grandpa passed a few years after, leaving Grandma pretty much alone to raise us. Anyways, here I am, in my sister's old room, with everyone downstairs watching TV while Grandma cooks, having looked through her old toy chest and found a drawing she had made when she was 7. The paper is wrinkled and dirty from the dust of a toy chest, but the depiction on it was clear as day and a testament to my sister's budding artistic skills. With a coloring pencil, she had drawn herself in the woods, smiling and standing next to another girl I didn't quite recognize initially. She colored her hair and skin a light metallic gray, and gave her bright blue eyes with a sketchy gray dress. The most notable characteristic was what looked like gray and blue dragonfly wings sprouting from her back. She even put the details of the web-like membrane in them. Then it all came back, bit by bit, piece by piece. My sister had been lured by this creature she drew, a fae or fairy. And while I'm happy to tell you she survived, obviously, I'm not so happy about what it took for that to happen. As soon as the memories came flooding back, so did the trauma of what happened, and my fear of the forest. I was 13 and Zoe was 7. Despite still reeling from our parents' death, we were pretty normal kids. Zoe was a girly girl, the kind that loved pink and unicorns. I grew out of that phase and thought I was practically an adult. I wanted to be like the cool girls at my school. But it was hard fitting in when your no-nonsense grandma forbade you from doing more than half the things kids your age were doing. I wasn't allowed to have the newest smartphones or anything. Grandma thought a kid's phone should only be for important communication with their guardian in case of an emergency, not for fun things like social media or watching YouTube. She gave me an old flip phone from the early 2000s, which had limited minutes, and I could only text, take crappy pictures, and play Pac-Man on it. If it weren't for her letting me use her old computer to play virtual online chat room games, the only fun things I was allowed to do on there, I don't even think I would have an in with the cool girls in my class. Sure, I was no one's best friend, often being a third wheel, and that sucked, but I had friends nonetheless, which was more than what some people could say. Me saying all this is to explain that I was past the time of playing dolls and hide and seek with my little sister. We were regrettably too far apart in age. I was originally going to be an only child, but Zoe was an unplanned pregnancy pretty much. and thus me distancing myself from her as soon as I categorized myself as a teen was more or less the indirect cause of why she went missing one day. Usually my time at home was spent on those online chat rooms, socializing with my friends as we dressed up and customized our avatars, or texting them in a big group chat over the phone. When I wasn't doing that, I was surfing the limited amount of channels Grandma had on the living room TV, and if I was especially bored, I would read a book or play cards against myself. None of that included playing with Zoe anymore, and every day she would pester me to entertain her, even though she seemed to be having enough fun on her own. She always seemed to need another guest for her tea party that wasn't a stuffed animal, someone to play the bad guy in a game of dolls, or someone to seek for her as she hid. She was extremely needy, to say the least, and it grinded on my nerves a lot. I would often yell at her to get out of my room and leave me alone, frustrated with my time with my friends being interrupted by some nagging baby asking me to put on a tutu and play ballerina. This upset her, as you probably already figured. She played with people at school, but had no one to play with outside of school, and summer break was the absolute worst, because her pleading for me to get involved with her playtime increased tenfold. Grandma would occasionally take her to the playground in town, or supervise her fun outside by sitting on the porch and watching her catch butterflies. But she was an old woman, and each year she had less and less energy, which means she gave me more and more responsibility. Not just chores, but babysitting Zoe also. It started with another one of those days. Grandma wanted to take a nap, but Zoe wanted to play outside in the woods. We were allowed to go in there as long as we made sure we could see the house at all times and didn't stay after dark. So, Grandma told me to watch her as she went to her bedroom, and begrudgingly, I took the excited 7-year-old outside and into the trees. Zoe wore a princess costume and brought with her one of those plush hobby-slash-stick horses, except it was a unicorn version, pretending to be a princess riding through a mystical forest on a magical steed. She tried to get me to play along. "Nina, can you be the evil witch?" "No," I grumpily replied, leaning against a tree and texting on my phone. I didn't like being outside as much as I did when I was younger. I hated the heat and the bugs. Her complaints became white noise as I played a funny video one of my friends sent to the group chat. My phone loaded it very slowly, and it buffered all the way through, but I had a good laugh once I finished it and texted my reaction. Then suddenly I looked up, and she was gone. "Zoe," I called. I heard nothing. At some point, her giggling had receded into the distance, and I didn't even notice. "Zoe, where are you?" I could feel panic starting to set in, but I walked around, further out into the woods and farther from home, desperate to find her so we wouldn't get in trouble with Grandma. The treetops blotted out the scorching sun, and I could hear nothing but insects buzzing and squirrels rustling the brush and harp music and... Harp music? One of my favorite movies involved the melody of a harp, so I could recognize the sound anywhere. It seemed to ebb and flow, and I couldn't for the life of me determine its origin. Everything felt wrong. Suddenly the shadows were much darker than before, and I couldn't see the house behind me anymore. I felt like eyes were on me. "Zoe, scream if you're in trouble!" Tears threatened to fall from my eyes, but before they could, a giggle sounded out from behind me, and a small finger poked my back. "Boo." Zoe squealed with laughter as I jumped and spun around to look at her joyful face. "You're so dead." I lunged for her, and she dodged me, her smile disappearing. "What?" She whined. "Don't scare me like that," I admonished. "You know Grandma's rule. Do you want to get lost out here?" Zoe shook her head, then muttered. "I wasn't lost. I made a new friend. She's my age, I think. I can't tell you about her, though. She's a secret." Her playful gaze seemed to beg me to ask about it, but I really didn't care. I rolled my eyes. "Whatever. If you don't want to get in trouble, don't mention this to her. Let's go get a popsicle." I took her hand and led her back, not believing what she said about making a new friend because I didn't see or hear anyone out there. The harp music was weird, yes, but it must have been further out around a neighbor's house, and none of our neighbors had kids. I assumed her imagination had conjured up someone, or she was simply lying to get out of trouble. After that day, Zoe had a new interest, fairies. Before, she was practically obsessed with princesses and unicorns. Now, she begged Grandma for fairy toys and a pair of fake wings and a fairy wand. Grandma was stern, but she still liked spoiling her. So she got her these things and even found a dusty old VHS tape with the complete series of a forgotten 80s cartoon show named Fairyland. Think My Little Pony, but with stiffly animated fairies. This was all great to me, because Fairyland kept her occupied during times when she would typically bug me to play with her. But soon, she started begging and pleading to be taken back to the woods, but I refused, because I was still annoyed at that little stunt she pulled the last time. She got mad enough to tell me she hated me and shunned me for a few days. "Aren't you wondering about my new friend?" was the first thing Zoe said to me after she stopped being angry with me. "Your imaginary friend, you mean?" I teased her as I played solitaire against myself on my bedroom floor. "She's not imaginary," Zoe pouted, sitting on my bed. "She's real. Look, I drew a picture of her, I'll show you." She ran to her room, and when she came back, she was holding that drawing I told you about, the one I have sitting in my lap right now as I type this out. She's not imaginary, but she has fairy wings and gray skin and hair. I raised an eyebrow, amused. "Come on, Zoe. You're too old for this. You stopped having imaginary friends when you were 5. Not gray, her hair is white." Zoe looked at her drawing insecurely. The white-colored pencil doesn't show on the paper. She looks like an angel. She has white everywhere, except for her eyes, they're blue. Her wings look like a bug's, though. I always thought fairies had butterfly wings. Butterflies are bugs, genius. I rolled my eyes. They're not pretty bug wings, I mean. Zoe said exasperatedly. "They buzz, and they look kinda icky." "That's great, Zoe," I replied condescendingly. "Could you close the door on your way out?" Zoe mean-mugged me and left my room in a huff. If Grandma wasn't strict about slamming doors, she probably would have slammed mine on the way out. The next time I had to supervise Zoe's playtime in the woods, I sat on the back porch to watch her instead. She was running around in her new fairy getup, and she seemed to be talking to herself, but looking at the air in front of her as if a person were there. No, as if she was talking to that tree right there. Then she looked at me and fidgeted as if worried, and stepped behind the tree. I didn't pay her any mind, because clearly she was still there. She was just hiding behind something. I figured she was trying to just get under my skin by pretending she was leaving my sight again the same way she did last time. Some kind of petty revenge for not being out there with her, I guess. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction by acting all concerned and calling for her, so I immersed myself in trying to beat my high score in Pac-Man on my shitty phone. I looked up after a while, and she was still hiding. Once again, I paid it no mind and got wrapped up in a few more games. Before I knew it, I heard footsteps approaching and realized Zoe had come back from the woods. She was smiling and panting, her face flushed like she'd just been running. Not only that, but a flower crown was perched on her dark hair, and she held something that looked like a plum in her hand, except it had a bluish tint and plums were more purple. "Let me see that." I stood up and held my hand out. Zoe hid the fruit behind her back and stuck her tongue out at me, running into the house. I ran after her, worried that Grandma would scold me for letting her pick random fruit from a tree. If she ate it and got sick, I had no doubt it would be blamed on me. Whatever it was, as it seemed too exotic to be in a random forest in Maine. Grandma was inside watching TV in her recliner, with her feet soaking and her gray hair up in curlers. Zoe ran up to her and showed her the fruit. "Grandma, look what I have." Grandma furrowed her brow and paused the TV, taking what looked like a round blue fruit with green leaves poking from the top out of her hand. Now that I looked at it more closely, there were greenish flecks all over it. "Where on earth did you get this?" "In the woods, from a tree." Zoe smiled. Grandma looked at me, and I shrugged. The old woman got up and went to the kitchen. We followed behind her and watched as she took a knife and sliced into the fruit to further examine it. The flesh inside was a gradient. The outer edges were blue, like the soft skin, and grew white more towards the center, resembling the flesh of a pear. "It looks good!" Zoe licked her lips. "You're not eating random things you got from outside." Grandma snapped and, much to Zoe's dismay, threw it in the trash. "I don't even see anything like that on Google," I said, checking the browser on my phone. "My friend Boza gave it to me." Zoe huffed, crossing her arms. "Bozo?" I asked. "Baozu," Zoe corrected me sassily, then pointed to her head. "She also made me this flower crown. There's no other little girls around here, child." Grandma shook her head and leaned against the counter, frowning at my little sister as she tried to make sense of this. "What are you talking about?" "It's her imaginary friend." I glared at Zoe for frustrating Grandma. Zoe seemed to get flustered and upset, fidgeting her hands. "SHES not imaginary. She's real. You said she was a fairy." I scoffed, then addressed our grandmother. "She showed me a picture of her the other day, and it's this little girl with weird colored hair and wings. I think she's been watching a little too much Fairyland lately." "Shut up, Nina," Zoe yelled. "You shut up. Why don't you tell her how you disappeared from me the other day?" I snapped, letting loose our secret. Zoe's mouth opened to retort, but then it shut as she nervously looked at our grandmother. Grandma folded her arms and stared sternly at her, as if to say, "Is this true?" "You're a jerk, Nina. You never play with me anymore, and now you're telling on me," she cried. "Enough!" Grandma snapped. I gave my sister a smug smile as she glared at me. "I can show you all that she's real. Just follow me to the woods," Zoe said pleadingly. "Oh, you don't need to show me anything, sweetheart." Grandma's voice took on an unrecognizable tone, and I worried that she was really angry. She plucked the flower crown off my sister's head and flicked that in the bin, too, giving it a look of disgust. "I know good and well what you've done." "Hey," Zoe protested, but Grandma held her back. "Look, she's just playing Dash," I began, worried she was overreacting. "You be quiet now." Grandma shot me a warning look. "You two have no idea." She looked out the kitchen window with a 1,000-yard stare, then back at Zoe. "You're not allowed to go in the woods anymore, you hear me? Not for a good long while." Zoe's lip trembled. But why?" "Because I said so," Grandma harshly answered. "You don't know how to act. Now wash up for supper." Zoe burst into tears and ran upstairs. I gave Grandma a confused look. "The woods ain't no place for a child anyhow," she grumbled, going to wash her hands in the sink so she could fix us a meal. "I just let you do what you want because of your parents." But I shouldn't be. I wanted to roll my eyes at the letting us do what we want part, because honestly it seemed far from it, but I remained respectful and decided to let her cool off a bit. Just as I rounded the corner to go upstairs, I heard her mutter, "It's just a good thing she hasn't eaten it." I didn't know just what she meant by that at first. I simply thought she was worried about the fruit being toxic or having germs. I went to Zoe's room to find her crying into a pillow. She yelled at me to get out, but I ignored her. "Tell Grandma you're lying, and that Bozo is imaginary," I demanded. "She's mad. She thinks you met a stranger in the woods and took food from them or something. You know how she is. So why would you even make up something so stupid?" She mumbled something into the pillow. "What?" I strained to listen. I said. She removed her tear-stained face from the pillow. "You're going to be sad when I go live with Boza in Fairyland forever, and you're stuck here with no one to talk to but those stupid people on the computer." "If you say so." I shut her door and went to my room, wondering what's gotten into her lately. Zoe ignored me all night, and after dinner, she went to bed pretty early. I took the chance to complain to Grandma how she's been acting as I helped her clean up the kitchen. Don't you think she's too old for imaginary friends? I sighed, scrubbing the dishes clean as Grandma swept the floor. I mean, I guess she's kind of lonely because I don't play with her as much, but I'm too grown up for the things she does now. I don't believe her friend is imaginary, Grandma said gravely, without looking up from her task. I looked at her and cracked a joking smile. Don't tell me you think she has a fairy friend, too? Whether you believe it or not, Nina, Grandma faced me with a sense of annoyance. The Fae are very much real, and they're not the cute little creatures like you see on them cartoons your sister's always watching. Some of them are benevolent, but a great deal of them are devilish and wicked. They lure in foolish children like our Zoe, and then they're never seen again. Now, quit your belly aching about your sister and finish cleaning those dishes. I closed my jaw before I could catch flies, in disbelief at the fact that a 75-year-old woman believed in fairies, or the Fae as she called them. Great! Zoe had triggered Grandma's superstitious fear of the supernatural, and she would definitely be in a sour mood for the next few days. Weeks passed, and I could tell Zoe ached for her play time in the forest. Oftentimes, she looked longingly out the windows, holding a cheap little plastic fairy doll Grandma had bought her. She didn't even bother begging me to play with her anymore. Her summer days were filled with drawing fairies and watching Fairyland over and over again. I still have the entire show memorized, just by overhearing her replaying it throughout the day. She didn't talk to me or Grandma unless she had to, and I actually felt pretty bad about how much we've been arguing. One night, Grandma was making a casserole, and she forgot a key ingredient. She liked to start preparing dinner early, so it was still daytime, maybe 4 in the afternoon or so. Damn it, Grandma swore from the kitchen before she found me watching TV in the living room. Nina, watch your sister while I go to the store to pick up something I forgot for dinner really quick. Okay. Grandma promptly left in her Jeep, and Zoe came downstairs, having likely heard the tires on gravel. Where's Grandma going? To the store. Cool. Can you take me outside while she's gone? Zoe smiled hopefully. I looked at her like she was out of her mind. Disobey our grandmother? Our grandmother? She noticed the expression on my face and begged. Please? Just really quick. She takes forever at the store. We'll be back before she comes home. I'm not doing that. I turned the volume up on the TV to drown her out. I left my fairy doll out there, Zoe said. I know exactly where it is. I promise I'll never ask you to play again for the rest of the summer if you help me. I considered it. This was a tempting offer. I turned off the TV and stood. Okay, but if you don't find that doll in the next 10 minutes, we're coming back without it. Zoe grinned big and ran for the back door in the kitchen. It was then that I realized she already had her shoes on. She was suspiciously already wearing a full fairy get-up with flats, wings, and a wispy tulle skirt. Wait, I called out. Let me get my shoes. I hurriedly shoved my feet into sneakers, not even bothering with socks so I wouldn't lose her. By the time I made it on the back porch, she was dashing into the trilline. Zoe, I yelled, bolting after her as I began to get the feeling I had been deceived. Was her fairy doll really lost? Wait, hadn't I seen her playing with it before? Embarrassingly, my little sister was faster than me, but at least I could still see her up ahead. She ran deeper than where we normally stopped exploring at, and I felt anger build up inside me. I'm telling Grandma. Suddenly, my foot caught a root, and I face planted into the earth, my nose bashing up against a rock and leaking blood. Stunned by the sudden pain splitting my face, I cupped my hands over my nose and groaned. The blood poured out like a river, and I realized that I may have broken it, as even the slightest touch of my fingertips made it hurt. Zoe, knowing she would stop running if she saw that I was hurt, my eyes fluttered upward weakly only to realize I couldn't see her anymore. On top of being in pain, I was nervous and scared, because there was no way she could disappear from my line of sight that quickly. Zoe. I slowly got up, the front of my shirt stained with dripping blood now. Zoe, where are you? Come back. I'm hurt. I thought I could hear the faintest hint of harp music, but it went away as soon as it had started. The forest grew dark. The shadows increased and the sunlight wanted, but I kept wandering about and calling my sister's name. The feeling of being watched was undeniable, and I felt a giggle, discreet and mischievous, like a kid barely containing their amusement as they did something they weren't allowed to, made itself heard uncomfortably close by. I turned in that direction, and I swear, I thought I could see long strands of white hair sticking out from either side of a thin tree. Someone was hiding behind there, someone young-sounding but short with white hair. I investigated immediately, wondering if Zoe's friend was not a fairy, but actually some strange albino kid who lived somewhere out here with her parents. But nothing was behind that tree, nothing at all. Then another giggle from a completely different place, louder and full of more glee than before. I turned and saw a pale hand snake back behind a tree trunk where this odd person was hiding. But there was no human explanation for how they ended up all the way over there when they were just a few feet in front of me. I closed my eyes and massaged my temples, telling myself my stressed mind was merely playing tricks on me. While my eyes were closed, someone whispered into my ear. Their breath spread goosebumps over my skin, and the quiet, mysterious little girl's voice made every hair on my neck stand on end. "She's not coming back." I screamed, and my wild eyes opened and landed on nothing but empty space next to me. "Stop freaking out and find your sister," I scolded myself inside my head, envisioning that was what my grandma would tell me if she could see me now. "Your mind is playing tricks. Find Zoe before she gets lost." I looked for her for maybe an hour or so, bleeding profusely from my nose and suffering a migraine, and when I finally returned to the house grandma, I was standing on the porch looking absolutely pissed. When she saw I was bleeding and that Zoe wasn't with me, she grew very concerned. What happened? She gingerly removed my hands from my face to see the damage. "Where is your sister?" "She's lost." I hiccuped through my sobs. She ran away from me. I told her to stop, but she kept going and going until I couldn't see her anymore. First, Grandma led me into the kitchen and helped me with my nose. Then she went and looked for Zoe herself, while I sat pinching my nostrils shut with my head tilted back and wet wipes at the ready to clean blood off myself if need be. When Grandma came back, she was sweating and went straight for the landline to call 911. The police scoured the forest and only found scraps of multicolored tulle from her skirt and footprints that vanished mysteriously. They filed a missing persons report, and the world carried on. Time slowed to a crawl for us. I was agonizingly aware of every single second that passed while my sister was missing. The minutes turned into hours, the hours turned into days, and the days turned into weeks. There were search parties. Her face was on the back of milk cartons and posted on the front windows of shops in town, but all that was ever left of her was those colorful, translucent pieces of skirt. During one of these search parties, when my grandma and I participated, I wandered off a little further from everyone and heard harp music playing. It felt like it was playing just for me, like it was calling out to me. It tugged at my mind, breaking past my defenses, tearing away the rationality that told me I shouldn't follow strange sounds. Before I could give in completely, I heard Grandma's stern voice yelling at me to come back and stay with the grown-ups. Then the music was gone, just like that. We didn't find her, as you would expect. My nose was indeed broken, and I went to the doctor, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the gaping wound in my chest forming the shape of Zoe. She had been ripped from us, just like our parents and Grandpa. And then there were two. The most consistent noise in the house was the sound of the TV droning on in background. Chipper game show hosts and stoic newsmen filled the bleak silence that encompassed our day-to-day. I didn't speak much, and neither did Grandma. She cooked and cleaned constantly, as if to distract herself every waking moment, and sometimes had the TV and radio playing at the same time. I stayed in my room most of the day, but sometimes I would go into Zoe's room to look at her things. I was looking at her most recent drawings she never showed me, which featured that weird gray fairy girl and a strange-looking forest that seemed more whimsical than the one outside. Oh, Grandma startled me as she appeared in the open doorway with cleaning supplies in hand. "You're in here. I'll come back later." "No, it's okay." I stopped her. "I was just looking at Zoe's fairy drawings." I felt my eyes water. "I just wonder where she is, why she disappeared like that." Grandma dropped what she was holding and hugged me, and sniffling and weeping, we stood there in each other's embrace for a long time. Finally, Grandma pulled back and held my shoulders, looking me deep in my eyes. "I have to tell you something." "What is it?" I wiped my wet face, noting how serious she looked. She squeezed her eyes shut for a moment to gather herself, and I couldn't help but think she looked remorseful. "I know what happened to your sister," Grandma said, leading me over to Zoe's bed and sitting down next to me. "She was playing with fire, and the good neighbors took her." "Our neighbors kidnapped her?" I shouted, wondering why she had been keeping this a secret. No, Grandma shook her head. "That's what we called them when I was growing up in this house. My grandma told me stories, how they would lure children into the forest, and they'd never be heard from again, or how they'd switch human babies with their own deformed offspring. The Fae are not good neighbors at all, but my grandma always told me not to speak too ill of them, or they'll get back at you. They're very vindictive, mischievous spirits." "Grandma," I sighed, looking away. I wanted to be respectful to her, but I wasn't in the mood for hearing about evil fairies taking my sister. It was clear to me back then that either she got lost or she, as much as I didn't want to even think about it, met with foul play out there. "You listen to me now, Nina." Grandma held my face and forced me to look at her. She started to shake as tears filled her eyes. "They took my brother." I sat and listened as Grandma explained the story of her brother, a little 10-year-old boy named Dustin who she got along pretty well with. He liked exploring the outdoors more than her, and spent time in those very same woods alone a lot. He would often come back whispering his little secrets to her, about how he found a friend who can do the most wonderful magic tricks, and then eventually how he found another world out there. She didn't believe him one bit, but she never called his bluff. She simply listened to his stories with great intrigue. One day, he came back with a strange fruit he'd been given by his magic friend, weird-looking berries they'd never seen before, and he offered some to her, but she declined simply because she was not very brave or open to new experiences like he was. He ate it in front of her and described the taste as weird, and that night, she saw him looking out the window listening to faint music coming from the woods. He left their bedroom in a trance, not answering her when she asked what was wrong. She thought he was simply going downstairs for a glass of water, so she went back to sleep. The next morning, she was woken up by their mother, who was frantically asking where Dustin was. I never saw him again. Grandma looked ahead, looking as if she was trapped in a terrible memory. I considered selling this house and moving somewhere else. When you two came to live with us, I kept thinking about what happened to him and didn't want it to happen to you. But your grandpa never believed in that stuff and wanted to keep the property in the family, so I honored his wishes. Still, I shouldn't have let you go out there. It's just been so long since he disappeared I allowed myself to believe it would be all right. I thought you would protect each other. I myself was not there to protect Dustin. I felt a stab of guilt. I'm sorry I didn't protect Zoe. Grandma hastily wrapped me in another hug. No, dear, that's not what I meant. I should have never left you alone. What do the Fae do with kids? I asked, afraid of the answer. I couldn't even believe I was entertaining the thought, but I couldn't deny that I believed every word my grandmother said about my late great-uncle. I was always told they raised them in their world, Grandma said, "That's the only thing that keeps me going. I like to think that Dustin and now maybe your sister are being taken care of. Maybe they were turned into fae themselves, and your sister finally got her wish to become a fairy. It's a nice thought, isn't it?" For some morbid reason, I had honestly preferred that Zoe had died and become an angel, as odd as that must sound to you. At least then her pain would be over, and she would be with Grandpa and our parents. The thought of her being trapped hopelessly in a world separate from our own was horrifying, at the complete mercy of some malevolent beings that were capable of making children vanish into thin air. I couldn't see how Grandma could be comforted by that, but I smiled empathetically at her anyways and nodded as if I agreed. That night, I devised a plan. I was going to find my sister no matter what it took. A couple months had passed since she disappeared, and summer break would be over soon. I wanted to do this before most of my free time would be occupied by the soul-sucking daily hell that was middle school. My grandma liked going to the library occasionally on Sundays after church, so I accompanied her this time and found a private little corner to go through the horde of Fae folklore books I'd gathered from the shelves. The old computer at home was slow to the point I preferred reading. I didn't want her to know what I was up to, and thankfully she was too busy in a completely different section of the library. I had brought a notebook and pen with me and researched for a few hours, writing things of worth down. I learned that Fae was an umbrella term for a broad category of creatures like banshees and changelings, and fairy was specifically for the humanoid winged beings. Fairies could be good and evil, just like regular people, but it was best to always err on the side of caution when dealing with them. Even a small mistake, like purely, for example, stepping on something that happens to be theirs or their home, could be punished greatly by them. You shouldn't openly insult them, and you have to be careful when accepting their gifts. If it's not a fair trade, they can take something from you without your consent. If you give them a gift, they could grant you something or you could subside their wrath. Particularly, they were believed to enjoy sweet things. Don't we all? But fairies especially, it seemed. They craved it above all else, and apparently it could diminish even the worst of fairy tempers. Honey, candy, cake, etc. Other non-food related gifts were anything pretty looking or expensive, like jewelry or really nice clothes. My research also told me their weaknesses, like pure iron, protective wards and charms, and even a salt circle. I thought back to the horseshoe that always hung above the front door of Grandma's house, and couldn't believe all this time that that's what it was for. Most importantly, I needed a way to get to the otherworld, which is apparently what the Fae realm was called. I learned that Fae use music to lure children similar to a siren's song. I figured maybe if I followed it, I could be taken into that world, and I could find Zoe. If not, the books told me another way was to step into a fairy ring, a circle of mushrooms, or perform a witchy ritual with offerings, and ask them to grant me passage into the realm. I didn't place much stock in either of these methods because it said the rituals took experienced witches who knew what they were doing, and I wasn't sure of the likelihood of me finding a fairy ring. So I was pretty much dependent on the possibility of the creatures who took my sister deciding to take me too. Based on my notes, I made a list of the arsenal I wanted to take with me into the forest. Over time, I collected the things on the list during trips with Grandma into town where we would go yard sailing or shopping, and I'd pay for them with my allowance. At the downtown shopping center, Grandma went into a thrift store, and I quickly visited the metaphysical shop next door, where I bought a good luck charm in the shape of a moon and a necklace with a pendant forged of iron dangling from the cord. I came out and re-entered the thrift store before she could notice. Then, at a yard sale, I bought someone's old jewelry for cheap. How could fairies know the difference between cheap and expensive in human stuff? After that, when we visited a grocery store, I bought some sweets to go along with my plan. I was going to do this on a Sunday, where Grandma would cook a big Sunday dinner and surely fall into a food coma. I ate, but not to the point of being too full, and excused myself to bed early. Once I was sure Grandma was in bed asleep, I snuck downstairs with a backpack full of supplies and retrieved the rest of what I needed from the kitchen. Basically, I had made homemade chocolate bars by melting chocolate chips and filling a mold with the fondue. Grandpa had an old hardware pantry in the garage with toolboxes, which contained items made of iron, and with my scarce money, I had enough chocolate for at least 2 king-sized molds, each with little iron pieces in them. I figured if I was really in a bind, I could give one to one of those monsters. Appeasing them with foods felt like a thanks. And thanks for what? Stealing my little sister and breaking up my already broken family? But I had some normal candies too in case I came across one of these friendly fae folk, just a precaution. Altogether, I had the food, including a sandwich for myself if I got hungry, water bottles, the good luck charm, the iron pendant, salt, and the jewelry along with a multi-tool and flashlight. My grandma was thankfully a heavy sleeper, so I was confident the sound of the back door opening and closing hadn't roused her. I was beyond scared. After all, I didn't like the forest much during the day, so being out there at night, surrounded by mysterious sounds and the echoing calls of unseen animals was not ideal. I walked for about an hour, shining my flashlight around and starting to relax as the sounds that enveloped the air started to seem more peaceful than ominous. The way the owls hooted distantly, the crickets chirping, the cicadas singing, and the rhythm of my footsteps on the grass. The more I traveled, the more ridiculous I felt. Look at me, a teenage girl hunting fairies, thinking it would help find her missing sister. Maybe I just wanted something to believe in. Maybe it was just a way for my mind to cope with her loss. Maybe believing I could save her was keeping me from going insane with grief. Oh boy, was I wrong. Not long after I considered giving up and turning back, I could hear the harp music. The melody was soft and heavenly, flowing throughout the environment and feeling like an inviting hug and loving words. It felt like this is what paradise sounded like. The forest was dimly lit with moonlight. The trees blocked a good portion of it. But another glow was clearly emanating from somewhere up ahead. It was faint due to the distance, but it was a dark, ethereal blue, contrasting with the pale, silvery moonlight. It was clear to me that it was not a natural source of light. Don't tell me it's actually true? I sped up my pace until the glow grew brighter, and I came across a small clearing with 2 towering trees, deformed and connected together at the top by one conjoined branch, reminding one of Siamese twins connected by the head. They formed an archway, and there was a gap between their collection of thick roots where more forest lay. Except the forest wasn't like the one I was standing in. The woods around my grandma's house were full of earthy browns and dark greens, and by all means there should have been such a sight visible through that gap. But no, the forest through that gap was cooler in tint, a mix of green and blue to be specific. It was also overly saturated. It almost looked like someone put a Technicolor filter over the world. This strange portal to another realm was the origin of the harp music, and I felt a giddy rush of excitement at the sight. Not because I was eager to find my sister, it didn't feel organic at all. If you could fill a scarily huge syringe and forcibly inject someone with over-the-top positive emotions, this is what it would feel like. My mind went blank as the glow wrapped around me like a sweet embrace, and I shuffled through the archway in a daze, unaware of the horrors that awaited me. Thank you for watching this video and joining me on this journey beyond the veil. Again, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and a comment letting me know if you liked this video. If you'd like to read the story or view the creator's profile, they will be in the description below. Make sure you subscribe to keep up to date when I post. Until next time we journey beyond the veil.